Okay, we are live with Alexander Makuris in London. Alexander, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Extraordinary times, lots of interesting things going on. And for somebody who takes an interest in history, I mean, it really is a time of history in the making.
Yeah, yes, it is. You know, when we first started the Duran, our live streams about 5 years ago, we used to
Mm.
ask where people were watching us from, Alexander. You remember that?
Absolutely, of course I do.
So let's take 30 seconds and ask where's everybody watching us from?
Mm.
We haven't done this in 4 years. I'm in Cyprus right now.
And I'm
Alexander's
in
in
London. I'm in London.
London. We got Australia and Hong Kong and Sweden, Brazil, Serbia, and Norway,
Mm.
sunny Cornwall, Botswana, Lithuania, Georgia,
Wow. Wow.
Ethiopia, Hungary. Wow, it's scrolling fast. Virginia, New Zealand, Netherlands, Romania, Albania, New York, New York, New York,
Mm. Mm.
Sweden, Melbourne, West Virginia, Japan, Mississippi, Montenegro, AZ in the house, Colorado, California, Kazakhstan, awesome, Washington, D.C., Manchester, UK, Alexander.
Mm.
Have you been to Manchester?
No, I never have actually. My wife was
Li-
there very recently, and it's a place I very, very much do want to go to. Very interesting place. Manchester and Liverpool, by the way. Liverpool is where the Beatles were on the
Beatles.
sea, but they're very, very closely interconnected with each other, and they have a very interesting culture and a very interesting politics, by the way.
Hmm. Nebraska, Delhi, Canada, with elections on the
Yeah.
28th, April
Mm.
28th,
I
with
know.
Carney, the
Looking very
Bank of England
Indeed,
governor.
looking
Yeah,
very nervous, I thought, when he announced them, actually. I was surprised. He's
yeah.
not a natural politician. This isn't something he really knows how to do, actually. It'll be interesting to see how he performs.
Well, he's a
But
banker.
clearly, he's a banker. He clearly wants to be prime minister for a long time, though.
Mm. He didn't do too well in the UK, did he, when he
Oh, no,
was Bank of
no,
England?
no. He's one of the reasons why the UK is where it is today.
Okay. There you go. Canada, beware.
Mm,
Beware of Carney.
mm,
Belgium, South Florida, Hollywood,
yeah,
Liverpool, UK,
yeah,
High Peak, England.
yeah.
High Peak, England.
Now that I'm not sure about, I'm not sure where that is. If I have to say,
Hmm.
yeah, but I will
Italia,
certainly look it up afterwards. And welcome to you in High Peak, England, if I
welcome.
may say.
Sicily, Indonesia, Holland,
Yeah,
Twin Peaks,
yeah,
Guildford, North Carolina, Washington State, San
yeah.
Fran, Texas,
Well, I have to
in
say,
local.
I am very impressed, and I mean, people in Washington State and in Japan and in Hong Kong. I mean, these are strange hours that I think you're.
Yeah.
So, I mean, thank you for joining us in these programs. I mean, I think the big take I have from this is that we absolutely do now have a community that encompasses the whole world. I
Yeah.
mean, we're everywhere. I mean, whereas,
Portugal,
yeah.
UK, Norway again, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Colorado,
No.
Minnesota, Texas, Spain. All right,
Well,
let's talk
let,
about what's going on,
mm,
Alexander.
mm.
Where do you want to begin?
Well, I think we should begin with the big story of the last few hours, which is this leak in the United States.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to get into the details of the leak itself and who's responsible and who's not. The fingers are now pointing very much at Mike Waltz. And there's some stories that he might be out, which wouldn't surprise me, by the way. I mean, he never looked to me like a fully comfortable member of the team. But it does give us an insight into some of the people within the administration. And we can see that JD Vance clearly uh, isn't enthusiastic about wars anywhere. He thought that this attack on the Houthis, maybe the United States was rushing into it. He doesn't seem to feel that it's America's job always to pull the coals out of the fire for the Europeans. And I get the sense that Pete Hegseth basically agrees with him, just to say. So it was a very interesting, lifting, if you like, of the curtain. Pete, we just got that insight, and we could see that these thoughts that we see coming out of the administration in public, what they say in public, is essentially the same as what they're saying to each other. So I thought that was very interesting, actually.
Mm-hmm. I believe there have been comments from Mike Waltz's office that have said this was legit.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, no,
Yeah.
it is. I've no doubt about that. I mean,
I think the Financial Times actually reported on this, that it was legit. Yeah.
Exactly. It was legit. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I don't think anybody seriously doubts this. But as I said, it is interesting to see what the overall perspectives of people within this administration are. So there is still clearly a more traditional Atlanticist wing. Mike Waltz, people like him. But there are others like Vance, who most definitely are saying, America first. We need to distance ourselves from Europe. I don't think Vance comes across to me as hostile to Europe as a continent, but he's saying, what is the United States doing all the time, helping out the Europeans? We only send 3% of our trade through this area, through the Red Sea. Europe gets 40% of its trade. Why are we helping them? And shouldn't they really be doing more? That was interesting. I mean, for me, that was an interesting revelation. And of course, it shades into lots of other things. So I'd say again, Vance, not keen on wars, full stop. I mean, he doesn't like them. And secondly, Vance saying America running around the world, sorting out Europe's problems for Europe, really isn't something that the United States ought to be doing.
Yeah, Vance did not agree with the strikes in Yemen, but he did say he'll go with the consensus.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I mean,
so he was basically, look, I'll go with whatever the team says, but I don't think this is a good idea.
Yeah,
and he's not so hot on the Europeans. I don't think it's Europe, as you said, the continent or the countries. I just think he doesn't like the political class in Europe.
Absolutely. I think on that, by the way, he and Trump agree with each other. I don't think Trump likes them very much either. But Vance is slightly more prepared to take a consistent line on this, and is also very wary of getting the United States involved in conflicts at all. But he is a team player. He's a loyal member of the administration, and that was interesting.
Using Signal so they could have these chats, that's kind of embarrassing. to be polite about it, that's very embarrassing that they're using Signal so that they can chat about strikes against Yemen, about starting a war, getting into a conflict against Yemen. It's bad enough that they're hitting Yemen. It's bad enough, but to use Signal to talk about it and use emojis and stuff like that was childish. And I'm being polite.
No, absolutely. You're being very polite, and I agree with you completely. I think that this is, one would have thought that the United States government has its own secure communications lines, and they wouldn't be using a commercial outfit like Signal. I mean, it seems bizarre to me, actually, I have to say. And whoever was making those sort of decisions, really, I think that there really ought to be some consequences. I'm not going to jump to conclusions. I'm not going to point any fingers because I don't know. But as I said, I just don't think that was professional at all.
Yeah, the reports are from some journalists that Walt was in communication with Goldberg at the Atlantic, which would make sense because the Atlantic is full on neocon publication, which doesn't like Trump. But Walt, He was, I believe, he was working for Dick Cheney. He was
Yeah.
in Dick Cheney's office, and he's neocon who has reportedly changed his positions upon entering the Trump administration. I don't know how much he's changed his positions, but he comes from that neocon wing of the Republican Party. So it does
Absolutely.
make some sense that he would have the Atlantic and Goldberg on his contact list, and perhaps he added them in there, maybe by mistake, maybe not. Who knows?
Well, indeed, we'll see. By the way, I mean, The Atlantic for me is always the magazine that the thing that tells you what The Atlantic is that Obama chose it to give his last interview before he ceased to be president. His big valedictory interview was given to Goldberg, as I very well remember.
Which is weird because, if I'm not mistaken, The Atlantic is owned by Steve Jobs' wife,
Well,
I believe.
well, there we go.
But it's very much a
Oh, no.
neocon type of
Absolutely, it
type
is
of
absolutely,
publication.
and it is not friendly to Trump at all, and that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. Okay. So just one question: is this a national security issue? You think, given
Oh,
what they
absolutely.
said, they didn't really say. Well, I mean, it is, but I mean, they didn't say anything that I guess the whole world didn't know was about to take place as far as going after Yemen. But it is a national security issue, is it not?
Absolutely. Can I say straight away? I mean, in terms of leaks of information, that there's been no compromise to the national security of the United States or to the operation that took place whatsoever, even if it had all been broadcast in real time. I mean, the Houthis would not have had time to use this information. So, I mean, in that respect, this leak is not damaging. I mean, there are important questions. I mean, why was Goldberg provided with this information? I mean, why Goldberg specifically? I mean, that's an interesting fact. I mean, was it they confused him with somebody else called Goldberg? I don't think so. Somehow, if you think that, I've got a bridge to sell you.
Yeah.
So that's just
You accidentally add someone like that into
well, exactly. I mean, there is something, but I mean, clearly there has to be consequences for that. But no doubt there will be an investigation. No doubt some explanations will be provided. I will be very interested to see what they are and how plausible they are. Just saying.
All right. So before we get to questions, and we'll spend most of the time on this stream answering questions.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, Alexander, on the negotiations in Saudi Arabia? 40 minutes. The reports are 40 minutes yesterday between, or 2 days ago, between Ukraine and the United States. 12 hours between the United States and Russia. And from what I read this morning, the talks between the US and Ukraine, because they told the Ukraine delegation to stay an extra day in Saudi Arabia, those talks already wrapped up, and it seems like they were 30 minutes to an hour long as well. So, I mean, this obviously tells us something about what's going on in these negotiations.
It is a substantive negotiation between the United States and Russia. I mean, Ukraine is therefore is just being told what the Americans and the Russians are going to decide between each other. From what I understand, the Russians, as they often do in negotiations, in the first hours, the 12 hours, basically didn't shift. And the reports in the British media is that they made it absolutely clear again that as far as they're concerned, all the four regions, the entire territory of the four regions, must be transferred to Russia as part of a peace deal. This is what the Daily Telegraph is saying. I've no reason to doubt that this is so. So, but can I just say something else? I mean, which people should not think that because at this time, in a first discussion like this, no agreements have been reached. They shouldn't, run away and think that there's never going to be any agreement reached. This is a discussion, a negotiation between two governments that haven't spoken with each other for almost 4 years. It's a very intractable, complex issue. There are issues of political capital and prestige to worry about on both sides. This negotiation is going to take months before we start to see visible signs of progress. And that's normal. I mean, it doesn't mean that, because they're working things through and taking it step by step, that doesn't mean that there will be an outcome. It just means that the negotiation has been conducted properly.
Putin wants a deal. True or false? Like he
Yes,
really wants a deal. What do you think? Because
he wants a deal, but not at any price. That's the thing to say. I mean, he wants a deal, but it's one that he has to be sure will satisfy Russian interests and Russian concerns, and which he can take back to the Russian people and say, look, when we started the special military operation, we set ourselves a series of objectives and we've met them.
Peskov said that Russia is going to honor the 30-day ceasefire, energy infrastructure ceasefire. Ukraine has already broken that ceasefire 3 times or 4 times.
Oh,
The last
more,
time the latest time they broke it was, I believe,
Yeah.
yesterday when they went after the Caspian Pipeline
Yeah.
consortium.
Yeah.
Where are American companies involved in that as well?
Absolutely. It suits the Russians at this time to honor that ceasefire. Putin agreed it to Trump. He could say, look, I'm honoring the ceasefire. The Ukrainians are not. They're the problem. I am not. I can't obviously continue with the ceasefire indefinitely. At the end of this 30 days, if this continues, I will have to go back. But, look who is really creating the trouble. It is the Ukrainians. It is not me.
Well,
bear in mind, and it's an important thing to say again, these attacks that the Ukrainians conduct against the Russian energy system are pinpricks. They are not comparable to the attacks the Russians conduct against the Ukrainian energy system. People persist in making this comparison where actually there is none. So the Russians can absorb this. The Ukrainians can't absorb Russian attacks on their energy system in the same way. 80% of Ukraine's energy system is out of action. There's enough electricity for residential users, and that's apparently the intention. There is enough electricity so that cottage industries can continue to function. But heavy industrial activity at the moment is impossible.
true, but there's also a media side to Putin not doing anything. I mean, how long can he go without any type of symmetrical retaliation if Ukraine continues to hit, even though they're pinprick attacks, if they continue to hit the energy infrastructure of Russia? I imagine that there are going to be a lot of voices telling Putin, look, they've hit us 5, 6, 7, 8 times. We're going to have to do something. And the Trump administration is not reining them in or whatever. They're going to have to do something.
Exactly. But the key thing is the Russians want to get this message to the Americans across. We're not the problem. The Ukrainians are. And if you go to the Russian Defense Ministry commentary yesterday, they actually said this: the fact that the Ukrainians are doing these things shows that Ukraine is not a party one can negotiate with. They make commitments which they don't honor. And that's the point that the Russians are wanting to make at this time.
Okay, William asks, isn't Trump going to waste months with a ceasefire?
Yes, that is my overwhelming concern on his behalf, if you like. I mean, it's his problem. It's his decision. But we go back to what Alex and I were saying way back in the summer. We were saying that he should never have he should avoid getting drawn into this thing. We said it, Steve Bannon said it, Trump, for whatever reason, maybe he was given wrong advice by people like Kellogg and Waltz, decided that he would try and find the solution to this conflict. And he is getting bogged down. We warned him about it. Steve Bannon has warned him about it. Putin has warned him about it. But there it is. I mean, it was his first real mistake, in my opinion, in his administration this term.
Speaking about getting bogged down, from Ralph Steiner, before Iran attack, should the U.S. try to end the Ukraine? Bogged down in Iran, bogged down in Gaza, bogged down in Yemen, bogged down in Ukraine. What should Trump do?
Well, this is, well, I mean, first of all, I mean, he shouldn't. I think this attack on Yemen was a huge mistake. We see that J.D. Vance clearly thinks it was. I mean, letting the whole Middle East situation get out of control in the way that it has done over the last few weeks, allowing this rhetoric in the United States and Israel to get out of control, talking about destroying all of Israel's enemies, establishing Israel as the leading power in the Middle East, threatening Iran in all of these kind of ways. This is a disaster for the administration, for Trump himself in the making. I mean, it will mean a huge problems in the Middle East and fires all over the place. Now, how all this connects with Ukraine is very interesting. Alistair Crook wrote a very interesting article in which he said that one of the reasons why there is this urgency on Trump's side to sort out Ukraine quickly is because he wants the Russians to help him broker some kind of deal with Iran, because he's worried that the Iranians otherwise might go for nuclear weapons by the end of the year. I don't believe the latter danger exists, by the way. I can see the urgency, if why the urgency might exist in Trump's mind, but to my mind, that is a further reason to say that the United States should not have become involved in the negotiations in Ukraine at all. They could have just gone ahead, started to communicate with the Russians, have meetings with them, have conversations with them. The Russians would have helped them over Iran, provided the Americans pitched it wisely. Even if the US wasn't seeking peace in Ukraine. So it just again goes to show that the administration is trying to do too much. Trump is trying to do too much. And exactly as people are saying, he risks now getting bogged down in all of these things and becoming a typical American administration all over again.
Yes. Let's get into the questions now, Alexander. Nick, thank you for that super sticker. Denise, thank you for that awesome super sticker. Tom says both the UK and Germany seem to be going really hard with pushing white boys to join up and die in Ukraine. Why they are doing this if they have no intention of fighting Russia and also no chance of winning?
It's an excellent question. The reason they're doing it is because they want to maintain this atmosphere of war hysteria that we're seeing in Europe at the moment. And there are multiple objectives here. In Starmer's case, it is in order to try to get Britain closer to Europe. I think that is the primary reason he gives himself. Involve Britain more closely again in European affairs, lead Britain back into the EU eventually, but use the security crisis, this confected security crisis, as the justification for doing so. In Merz's case, he's using the hysteria over Russia to do away with the debt break, which he's now done. And he's now going to have all these funds that he's going to spend vast sums of money pouring into the German economy, ultimately creating a crisis, but making a lot of his friends rich. It's BlackRock economics, and that's exactly what Merz is about.
Yeah, exactly. Tim, thank you for that super sticker. Matthew says, could Iran drag the entire world into a conflict, or would the nuclear superpowers avoid this like in Ukraine? Thank you for your fantastic work.
Well, you say right. I mean, I don't think Iran is looking for a conflict with the United States. I mean, why would they? But if they feel under pressure, I mean, they might start taking action. And of course, if Israel and the United States attack them, as they're now threatening to do, as they've threatened many, many times to do, well, we will have a massive conflict. It will lead to increases in oil prices. It will lead to a crisis across the Middle East. And of course, a lot of people assume that it will be a war that ends fast. No neocon wars end fast. You might have briefly an ephemeral victory, or at least what you call a victory. But the iron law of neocon wars is that they last a very, very long time, and they cause havoc and disaster in their wake. So I think, getting involved in a conflict with Iran is a huge mistake. Now, if the nuclear superpowers were to get together, then I think the answer is that they could perhaps come to some kind of agreement over Iran. But will they? I mean, at the moment, there's tentative discussions about this. But if it's all conditional on some kind of progress over the conflict in Ukraine, then I'm afraid that it probably won't happen, because resolving the conflict in Ukraine is going to take months, if not years. And given how difficult the Ukrainians are, we could still end up ultimately with a military outcome.
Yeah. Port Film Co-op says, what is the edgiest podcast you enjoy and why?
The edgiest podcast.
Edgiest.
That is a very good question. I can't say that I've ever found any podcast edgy exactly. I mean, do you mean podcasts that we make, or do you mean podcasts made by other people which we
that you
watch?
enjoy, that you watch.
Which you watch.
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
Doesn't have to be politics.
It doesn't have to be politics. That's a good point, actually.
Or geopolitics. Could be
geopolitics.
Could be critical drinker or nerdrotic. I don't know.
No, I don't know. Candace
Owens.
Candace Owens is pretty edgy. I would agree with that, actually. Yes. I have to say, I find Piers Morgan hilarious sometimes, infuriating. I'm not sure that I exactly enjoy it, but I mean, yeah. There we go.
It's our Jerry Springer.
Yes, Springer, exactly. I mean, can I just say? I mean, I don't think of podcasts or videos in that that kind of way. I mean, so it's not.
He despises Putin. He loves Zelensky. Despises
Putin.
Absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely. I've never seen anyone hate Putin more than Pierce.
Well, absolutely. Well, quite true. Absolutely, yes. I would agree. I mean, there's a man called Nick Ferrari who does podcasts here in Britain as well, who works for LBC, and he's pretty edgy sometimes. Anyway, I mean, I would have to give a pass on that one exactly, because I mean, I've never thought about it in quite that way, to be honest.
Yeah. All right. Arthur says the USA constantly destabilizes Middle East situation for which Europe has to then pay consequences. The whole bailing out Europe is horribly cynical. Well, Europe put themselves in this situation.
Yeah. There is a lot of truth in the point that you're making, but always understand something about the neocons in the United States, which is that they have very much their roots in Europe and their focus in Europe, and of course, by extension, in the Middle East as well. I've always felt that with the neocons, Europe is at the center of their thinking, which is why Russia is so important in their minds, because, of course, they still look at everything very much from that perspective, that the United States must be the most powerful country in the world, because we need the United States to keep the Russians in order and to keep the situation in Europe under our kind of control. So I think that's neocon thinking. My own view about Europe is that the way to understand modern history is that what happened in the 20th century is that the Europeans managed to involve the United States in their own quarrels. And as a result, they infected the Americans with their own geopolitical pathologies. And that's basically where the neocons have come from. The United States, I'm not idealizing the pre-World War I United States at all. I know a lot about it. But the United States before the World Wars was a very different country.
Not only that, but
Mm,
when it comes to Europe, I was thinking a lot about this with the whole
yeah,
Greenland thing
yeah.
and the fact that Vance's wife and a delegation is going to be in Greenland on Thursday.
Mm,
And as much as I'm against the Trump administration going to Greenland and effectively annexing
mm,
Greenland, let's say, which is just completely crazy what they're doing.
mm.
Denmark and near Europe, they put themselves in this situation by going after Russia.
Yeah.
Because what they did by going after Russia is that they removed a balancing force, a stabilizing force in
Yes.
Europe. It was stabilizing Europe with cheap energy, and it was acting as a type of balance against the United
Yes.
States. And the
Yes.
minute they went after Russia and they said, we're going to break Russia apart and we're going to destroy Russia, they left themselves with only one game in town, and that was the United States. And now the enemy is at the gates in Denmark. And where do they go now? Where does Denmark go? They have nowhere to run.
Well, this is exactly right. Emmanuel Todd, by the way, the French academic, made something of the same point as you've just done. I mean, he said this before, that what the Europeans ought to have done was to maintain some kind of a balance between the superpowers. And he even at one point, not in his books, but he said that Russia is Apollo and America is Dionysus. That the Americans are always a bit wilder, where you need the steadier side, which is the Russians, to sort of balance the two out. Of course, that's very French way of thinking, but it's not far from what you've just said, and I think it's a valid point actually. I mean,
I say the same. I
it's
say the same thing in the
absolutely.
context of Greece as well.
Well,
In
absolutely.
that Greece has gone all in against Russia,
Yeah.
but here you have a very unpredictable Turkey and an
Yeah.
unpredictable Erdogan, and you've burnt your bridge with Russia, which was acting as a type of balancing force and as a type
Yeah.
of security for Greece vis-a-vis Turkey.
Absolutely correct. Yes. I mean, that is exactly correct. But there it is. I mean, the Europeans, as you rightly say, have brought this situation on themselves.
Rubia Pell says, I doubt the U.S. will beat the Houthis, but this might lead to a war against Iran. Then Russia will step in.
Well, that's right. I mean, if we get into a situation where there is a war with Iran, between Israel and the United States and Iran, then inevitably the Eurasian powers will become involved. Not just Russia, first and foremost, but also eventually China too, because Iran is an absolute key part of the Eurasian structure. So it's something that, again, one wonders whether this is fully understood in Washington.
From Norzan, how do you guys think the Transnistria issue will be handled? This slate of land cannot be contested forever. It must be settled.
I think absolutely. And I think that sooner or later, over the course of the very complex negotiations that are taking place between the Americans and the Russians, the question of Transnistria is certain to arise. And it will arise in connection with the situation in Odessa, which is intimately connected to the situation in Transnistria. This is an inevitable part of the discussions and of the negotiations that are going to take place. I think that when Putin said to the industrialists, if we don't get the 4 regions, we are going for Odessa as well, which is apparently what he did say, that isn't to be taken to mean that Putin and the Russians are giving up on Odessa. I mean, it shows on the contrary that Odessa and by extension Transnistria are very much on their minds.
From Miss Texas G, is it that Britain is motivated by jealousy of Russia?
Yes, there's a very strong element of this. I mean, Britain used to be the great power, and it's no longer that anymore. And its major sparring partner throughout the 19th century as a great power was Russia, and the British can't get over the fact that they are no longer a great power, and Russia still is. So that does play an important role in these resentments and angers and frustrations. One of the other things, and there are lots of reasons why the British are so antagonistic to Russia, is that the British believed that they defeated Russia in some kind of a way in the 1990s. A lot of them went over there, and they were doing very well for themselves during that time. I mean, I should say that London was full of Russian money, as I remember in the 90s and early 2000s, so-called Russian money. I mean, law firms, businesses, all kinds of things were going into Russia. And then you could see it all being closed off. And this has created huge resentments and angers as well.
Banos, thank you for that awesome super sticker. Thank you so much. Hey, today is an important day for Greece, Alexander.
Absolutely, very important day. It's
March 25th.
March 25th, exactly. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes, it's true. Gosh.
Brilham says,
It's
any chance?
our Independence Day, which, by the way, to be very clear, was secured for us as a result, obviously, of our own war of independence, where we fought heroically against a far more powerful country. But eventually, the Russians stepped in, and there was a Russian-Turkish war, which people never talk about or remember. And it was after the Russian victory in that war, which was fought specifically on the issue of Greek independence, that we gained our independence. Of course, we had to fight for it first. The Russians wouldn't have come to our rescue if we hadn't done so and hadn't fought by ourselves for many years. But anyway, that was what happened.
Brilham says, any chance of another stream with Dr. Nema Parvini? Yes.
Absolutely, of course. And definitely.
Lewis says, first time catching you live. I'm getting a PhD education listening to you guys. Shout out from Texas, the great state.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
You so
thank you.
Brilham says, can you both comment on the role of Tulsi Gabbard and her impact at this point in her tenure, seeing the recent developments in the MEA, Ukraine, Pacific?
Too early to say. She's only been there for a short time. I suspect she's under an enormous amount of pressure from all the usual people. As we know, she wasn't able to get Daniel Davis as one of her deputies, and that, I'm sure, was as much targeted at her as it was at him. This is my view. I've no information, to say that, but I think over time, she's a hardworking and very intelligent person. I think she will gradually begin to get a grip on the situation with the intelligence communities, and I suspect Radcliffe at the CIA will help her.
Yeah, people went really hard against Gabbard when she flipped on Yemen, when she came out. I guess she came out in support of the administration and attacking Yemen.
Yes.
But I do agree with you, Alexander, that she's probably under an immense amount of pressure. We see it in the messages from the Atlantic that were leaked with what this group is talking about. We saw it with Daniel Davis, and that he was not allowed to enter the team. So she's probably under a lot of pressure.
Yes.
As I imagine, Vance, I mean, those messages revealed that Vance is also kind of a little outside of the group think.
Yes. Well, clearly he is. I mean, he says he'll go along with the team, but that basically is a sign that he is not ultimately in overall control.
Joe says, why does America need Russia to go against China when America itself created China? America itself.
Well, this
created
is created China. That's a bit strange. I thought that China really has a very, very ancient history going back. I can't remember how many thousands of years to the Yellow Emperor, according to the Chinese. Anyway, America didn't create China. If you mean that China's economic development was assisted by the opening up of American markets to China in the 1980s and 1990s. Well, there's a certain element of truth to that. But by now, China has far surpassed this. I was talking to a Chinese expert yesterday. We had an informal meeting over dinner yesterday, and he was discussing all of this with me at very great detail. And well, I mean, that is how it is.
Yeah, Tulsi knew what she was getting into. And Vance should stand up to these neocons. Huh?
Yeah, it's all easy to say. Done. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, what I say is this: yes, this is an ongoing battle and a struggle, but at least we have discussions between the US and the Russians. In other words, between one superpower and the United States. Under the Biden administration, we had no talks with anyone. We had conflicts with everyone. I mean, personal relations between Xi Jinping and Biden had completely broken down. Xi Jinping telling Biden, "I don't believe you. You're lying to me," and that appearing in Chinese readouts.
I think it's better to have people like Tulsi in the administration.
Absolutely.
Even if she has to put some water in her wine.
Yeah.
I think it's, as we say in Greece, I think it's better that you have someone like that in the administration. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Brulham says the Trump admin moving against Canada and the scapegoating of Trudeau by the Liberals, rehabilitating their image in a manner few outsiders can comprehend.
Well, I mean, it tells you again of the extraordinary amount of information control in Canada, and it also tells you something else, that there is this very, very terrible, as far as I'm concerned, coalition in Canada between Ukrainian nationalists, who are playing clearly an important role now in the Liberal coalition, and what you might call the affluent globalist middle class, neoliberal middle class, which you find in so many Western countries now.
From Ralph Steiner, Yanks appear to be carpet bombing Houthi residential areas, much like the Jews carpet bomb Gaza residential areas. Are the USA and Israel basically one nation?
No, they're not one nation. They have many differences. And in fact, I suspect that those differences are growing greater and will completely diverge eventually. They are allies. They are very close allies. And there are some people in the United States who do want them to work in unison. I mean, there was this US official, and I'm going to say who I think it was. I think it was Mike Waltz, who basically said that the purpose of the United States is to ensure Israel's total victory over all its enemies, leaving Israel as the dominant power in the Middle East. That seems to me to reflect Mike Waltz's thinking. Just saying. I mean, I may be wrong there. That's just my own guess.
Brilham says Pierre Poilievre is completely feckless. He's not really seen as a positive alternative. The Laurentian elite versus the Western elite is the way to understand Canadian politics.
I suspect you are right. I don't know enough about the politics of Canada to be able to give that kind of assessment of it. I mean, you asked me about Germany, for example, or Britain. I can talk about that in a very informed way because I know these two countries. Britain, obviously, is where I live. I don't have that deep knowledge of Canada that I would need to have to be able to make comments like the one you've just made. And that's not to say that I think you're wrong. Almost certainly, I think you are right. And for what it's worth, what I've seen in Poilievre does not impress me.
Kiel Leva Paulson, thank you for joining the Duran community. Ralph Steiner says, after Trump threatened Canada, King Charles offered the USA an invitation to join the British Commonwealth, where he'd teach them proper English again.
Quite, yeah.
El Emigrante said, I'd it'd be so funny if the U.S. takes control of Nord Stream 2 and sells energy to Europe. Great show as always. Might happen.
Well, indeed, that would be extraordinary. I still have take a deep breath before it happens. By the way, on the US joining the Commonwealth, I do think they need to bear in mind, because I know some people, Trump apparently was keen on the idea that, of course, the head of the Commonwealth is the king. So it would mean that the Republic, which rebelled against George III, was joining an institution headed by George III's descendant, direct descendant. Just saying.
Kev Jones says, cheers, guys. Thank you for that super chat. Jack Ridley, thank you for that awesome super sticker. The hockey goalie says the UK has the 5th largest defense budget in the world, but can only put around 70,000 men in the field. Sounds like the MOD could do with a Doge-style audit. Stammer's plans are for the birds.
Many people in London are saying this, that we actually need our own equivalent of Doge in order to make any of this work. Will we get it? Of course not. There is no one like Elon Musk to be found in Britain. And if Elon Musk existed, well, the British deep state would quickly sideline him.
Sparky said, has anyone told President Trump that 10 times more Ukrainians have been killed in the conflict than Russians, and it's far from a stalemate?
I don't think anybody has, and that's one of the major points of concern. When I say it's anybody, I think the Russians are trying to convey this to the Americans. It's just that I don't think the Americans believe them, because the Americans hear all this rhetoric and propaganda, and I think they're still very influenced by it. You need to go to the actual situation on the ground to get a sense of what the realities there is. That's one reason why I'm really sorry that Daniel Davis is not actually joined Odney, Tulsi Gabbard's, the office that she headed, because he does have that granular understanding of the information on the ground. And of course, he brings to it the understanding of a soldier as well. And the United States needs the kind of assessments that he is making.
Annie P13 says, thank you for your honest news in this crazy world. Thank you, Annie, for that. From Bad Wolf FTX, would the Duran consider attempting to interview Ali Abu Awad? A pacifist solution to the Palestinian-Israel conflict is something that is rarely even mentioned as a possibility.
I don't know this person, but obviously, I mean, from what you say, I'd be most interested to interview him. Whether or not that kind of solution is a viable one, I don't know. But I would be if he holds those views, absolutely.
Nikos says, brace yourselves, a lot of questions coming. Nikos says, I had no questions in the previous week, and then Witkoff talked, but I would like to start with a happy Independence Day for Greece. We should all remember Kapodistrias and how Russia helped.
Absolutely. Kapodistrias was the first governor of Greece, the first leader of independent Greece. He was a Greek from Corfu. He was formerly foreign minister of Russia. That seems astonishing, but he was. I'm not going to explain how he got to that post, but he was a very, very successful and important foreign minister of Russia. And he stepped down from that position, and he became, the first independence leader of Greece. Now, one of my ancestors on my mother's side was his secretary, just the same. So I have a very strong feelings about Kapodistrias.
Nico says the drone attacks on Russia have become more and more successful. I see a lot of people being angry and demanding the conquest of the whole Ukraine. I also see the activation of a lot of Russian liberals using the inflation to anger the people. Is it 21%, as Daniel Davis has said? Is it sustainable? Is it worse than the 90s? And can they fix it?
Well, first of all, a lot of comments here. First of all, I don't think the drone attacks have become more successful. I think that this is very much the imagery that some people are making. But I think if you look at what the drone attacks have been achieving, they haven't really been achieving very much. Let's take an example: the latest drone attack on the Engels air base, which burnt up some buildings there. We don't know actually what was in those buildings, but there was a big drone attack. I remember, I think it was in 2022, on an airbase in Crimea. It caused far more damage than this one has done. People look at these drone attacks. There's a huge amount of publicity when one particular drone manages to get through and do some damage. And that is then built up into a story that the drone attacks are successful. And I think the reality is the exact opposite in terms of attacks on cities, on Moscow, for example. They're completely unsuccessful. In terms of attacks on the energy system, they are completely unsuccessful. In terms of attacks on military facilities, sometimes one gets through, but again, overall, they are unsuccessful. In terms of energy prices in Russia, they've not contributed to any rise in energy prices or any energy shortages in Russia. In terms of exports of Russian oil, no effect there at all. So I don't think they've been successful. I think, like so much else about the way in which Ukraine conducts this war, the success has been mostly in the media, and that is basically what they're about. They're a media exercise. Now, about the inflation in Russia, it is not 21%. I know that this has been a figure that has been circulated in the West. The actual 21% is Nabulina's interest rates. She put up interest rates to 21% to crush inflation, which is around 10%, but that's a spike. And apparently, according to Nabulina herself, it's now starting to fall. She believes that it will be back to 4% by the end of next year, and she's looking at a 7% inflation by the end of this year. I think those are the real figures, and the Russians are very, very good at calculating inflation. Living standards, real living standards in Russia have been rising because wage growth has been exceeding inflation, exceeding the rise in prices.
Sparky says, free Greenland from Danish tyranny and brutal oppression. Ralph Steiner says, was the involvement of Mayor Lansky and the Jewish mafia's control inside the CIA in the assassination of JFK a shock to Alexander, or not really?
No, not at all. I mean, the involvement of the mafia has been well established for a very, very long time, if I can say. I remember reading books back in the 70s talking about the role of people like Sam Giancana and Santos Traficante and all of these other mafia people. So there's nothing new there, really.
Truth scores them. Thank you for that super chat. Nico says, I understand Putin's position, but why doesn't he explain to his people that he is looking for stability beyond the war? Can his presidency survive such pressure? Can he maintain order?
He explains it all the time. I mean, Putin is a person who is talking continuously. I mean, this isn't something that most Russians are unaware of. That doesn't mean that there isn't a great deal of argument and stress about this. Many, many people in Russia do feel that he's being altogether too moderate. And they do feel that any deal with the United States is not going to be worth the paper it's written on. So why bother? So there is that very strong current of opinion within Russia. It's not that they're unaware of Putin's views, it's that they don't agree with his views on this.
From Humble Peon, did either of you catch the Lex Friedman interview of Narendra Modi last week? Any thoughts?
No, I didn't, to be quite honest. I've heard about this. I didn't follow it.
Yeah. Truth Scores Them says signal leak, inside job to oust Waltz neocons, question mark.
Possibly. We should presumably find out something. My own view, I'm going to say this. I mean, we had a discussion about this, Alex and I. This is that I don't think Goldberg was, I don't think this was a mistake. It's quite intentional by someone.
Yeah. Nico says, people really complained about Witkoff for supporting Israel. I am more neutral towards that situation. I think that both factions are religious extremists and deserve each other. However, Witkoff mentioned the two-state solution. Isn't that the best deal for the people of Palestine, getting out Hamas and becoming a nation with American and Gulf nation investments? And finally, I think that Witkoff should approach Pezeshkian first because he is a man of peace, and then mediate with the Russians for a peace with Iran. Do you agree?
I think you should. I think Witkoff should take you on, Nikos, as his advisor, because it seems to me that you have all kinds of interesting ideas about how he should take the situation forward. I absolutely think the United States should have direct contacts with the Iranian leadership, and I think Pezeshkian and Harakchi, the foreign minister, could indeed be people that American officials could usefully talk to. Just saying, I don't mean by that they should expect quick agreements with them, or that they should put aside, adversarial perspectives. All I'm saying is exactly as Witkoff himself said over the course of that interview when he was talking about Putin. It is always better to speak to your adversaries than not do so. So absolutely, on that I agree with you. About the two-state solution, this has been talked about since the mid-1960s. In fact, you could go back even further to the original UN partition plan of 1947. It has never been brought to fruition. In 1947, the Palestinians rejected it. Now, essentially, as far as I can see, the Israeli leadership does. Whether we will ever get to that point, I mean, very difficult to say.
From Miss Texas G, Trump may sign whatever documents he chooses, but if the Ukrainians don't comply, what will happen?
Well, that's a very good question. Well, then we come back to what Trump decides to do. If the Ukrainians don't comply with any agreement that he signs on their behalf, then I think the correct thing for him to do is to stop all further military aid and intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians. I mean, I don't see what else logically he can do. The danger is that, of course, the Ukrainians are not going to comply with any agreements, because that's what the Ukrainians always do. They're not complying with the 30-day truce, for example. But when it all breaks down, Zelensky and his people will say it wasn't us, it was the Russians. We complied. It was the Russians who broke all the agreements. It was the Russians who broke the ceasefires. And the European media will agree and will give its megaphone to that narrative coming from Ukraine. And parts of the liberal media in the United States will also. And parts of the US government will do so also. They will blame the Russians for Ukrainian refusal to comply with agreements, just as after the Minsk agreement, the Ukrainians refused to comply with the Minsk agreement, and yet the West sanctioned Russia for its non-compliance. Now, the question is, will Trump fall for that again? Will he be drawn into that trap of blaming the Russians for Ukrainian non-compliance? We'll see. But that is the big danger here.
William says, if Trump wants to be embroiled, why not make life easier and focus 100% on the final bilateral peace deal? And if Ukraine says no, cut the umbilical cord. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a very good plan. I think that's exactly what he should do. I don't think he should have got involved at all. I think he's created for himself a bed of nails. But there it is. But
He decided to do it.
he decided to do it, and I think what you suggest is the best way forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah. We've been saying it forever. He shouldn't have gotten involved, but he decided to do it. That's the reality.
Yeah,
He said, I
He
want to
listened
negotiate this. Okay.
he listened to Kellogg and he listened to Waltz, and I think he thought it was a lot more easy than it really is.
Mm-hmm. Sparky says, wouldn't a Russian naval base on the Strait of Hormuz secure the Indian Ocean access for BRICS and deter the U.S. and Israel from attacking Iran?
Well, as I understand it, the Iranian constitution prohibits it. The Iranian constitution forbids the establishment of foreign bases on Iranian territory.
Ralph Steiner says, quite a few countries have enjoyed having a bit of bifo with the Brits over the centuries, the French, the Germans, and the Yanks, and of course the Russians.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of countries have been at war with Britain, and we perhaps it's a more accurate thing to say, we have been at war with lots of countries because quite often we've taken the initiative. We have a pretty martial history, if I can put it like that. I don't think that reflects the sentiments of the British people today, by the way.
Ranhild Noor says, someone suggested that the U.S. are focused on keeping the oil and trade lanes open and expand massively with the Gulf Arabs more than protecting Israel.
Well, I think there may be some truth to this, and I think if you listen to Vance, what he was saying, I mean, he was concerned about the price of oil over the course of those discussions. I think that there is also, I have to say this too, a current of feeling within the US government that he's very, very supportive of Israel altogether. Unhealthily so, in my opinion, to the point where there is a tendency to sacrifice American interests in order to support Israeli objectives.
Phantom of many topics. In English, the word for female pronoun is she. That is how to pronounce the surname of the president of China, not J sound in the surname, but yes, in middle name.
I have been told otherwise, just to say, by Chinese people that it's actually C, not she, C. Now, I'm not going to get into this because I don't speak
I don't know.
Chinese.
I've heard J, I've heard she,
Yes.
I've heard, I don't know.
Yeah,
I put my hands up. I don't know.
C.
Sparky says, go answer Allah, fight the power.
No.
Kat Sunter, welcome to the Duran community. The hockey goalie says Gaza, Israeli annexations in Syria, Erdogan, Romanian political strife, EU free speech, etc. Have we reached peak hypocrisy? How can we come back from this? I fear what we're reaping is unrecoverable.
You're absolutely right. The level of hypocrisy, especially in Europe, is simply off the scale. And where do we go from here? We head to collapse if we continue with this, because hypocrisy does ultimately lead there. There becomes an incredible dissonance between what we say and what we actually do, and with the situation around us. And eventually, as I said, it creates a crisis.
Tsunami Bomb says Sergei Lavrov to be interviewed about aspects of the Saudi negotiations on Russian Channel 1 at unknown time today.
Yes, I would certainly something to look out for.
Sean Ellis says, fighting back against the Houthis who have been shooting at our ships for over a year. It's not being a neocon. Policy is no Neil Knapp stop at what crap? Well, policy, I think, will not stop with that crap.
Well, the problem is with what result? Lots and lots of attacks on the Houthis, leading to what exactly? Now, we did have a cessation of attacks by the Houthis on shipping in the Red Sea, and that came after the Gaza ceasefire. And then the Gaza ceasefire began to break down, and as part of that breakdown, the Houthis resumed their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. And then we attack the Houthis, which will, on all previous counts, be shown to have been unsuccessful. And for what objective, and to what end? I'm going to say this. I think that some people amongst the Houthis actually want this because it makes them stronger. It makes them appear across the Middle East as the force that is resisting successfully the United States and Israel.
Brulham says, Alex, I believe you skipped many of my questions, at least 3. I think I got all of them, Brulham, but I'll go back and check.
Yeah.
Kenderath says, your view of Baerbock's nomination for the UN role.
We need light relief.
Little Falker says, my wife and I will be in Athens on a cruise in May. I'll be on the lookout for a guy talking to himself on a camera walking around.
Oh.
Maybe I'll be around Athens in May. I'll see. Hope you have a great time on the cruise. Claudia Spencer says, I find it absolutely criminal evil killing innocent civilians in Yemen to send a message. Where is the outrage?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, again, purposeless violence is cruel. It doesn't. If it doesn't achieve anything, if it doesn't fulfill any achievable military objective, then what is the purpose of it?
Jungle Jin says the ceasefire in Gaza might as well have been calculated to draw its residents back to finish the job of genocide, more like a Holocaust.
Well, I mean, there are an awful lot of people in the Middle East who are saying that. I don't think that was Trump's view when he basically brokered it. And I'm going to say this. I think a lot of people in Gaza probably felt that having a few weeks of relative calm probably did help them pull their lives together and sort themselves out, at least to some degree. I mean, a break from it, maybe, if I can put it like that. But where this situation is going now, one has to be very worried, very pessimistic.
Silent Train Falls, thank you for that super sticker. David Falconer says, can you comment on Duterte's arrest in Philippines?
Oh, I think it's a hugely mistaken thing. If he has done criminal things in the Philippines, he should be prosecuted for them there. Involving the International Criminal Court is outrageous. And I can't help but think that President Marcos Jr., by having him arrested and sent to The Hague, knows that he has no case against him in the Philippines and is using the ICC to eliminate a potential political opponent. Just saying.
Sparky says, I've found clever and capable technical people all over the world. It's ironic, boneheads like Walt and Rubio, neither of whom could change a light bulb, underestimate Yemen's engineering prowess.
Absolutely true. I agree.
Ralph says, China started imperial state Qin Shi Huang at 221 BC, USA 249 years old, just saying.
Yeah, absolutely true. Now, if I may say so, of course, what you're referring to is the unification of China under the first emperor. But there were 3 dynasties which didn't assume the imperial title before that. China had about 2,000 years of history before Qin Shi Huang.
Puppet Master's Foe says many people in Gaza went back to the north during the ceasefire and now have to leave again. It is almost as if Israel wanted this. More targets, but maybe I just see the dark side of things.
You may be right. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think it was quite as calculated and as ruthless and as cynical as that. But, a lot of people perhaps will think that. I know some people who do.
There are reports, Alexander, in Israeli media today I was reading that Egypt is trying to broker
Yeah.
the ceasefire. They're trying to get the ceasefire back on, and there's some sort
Absolutely.
of there's going to be a hostage release
Yes.
that Egypt is working on. I don't know if that's going to
Absolutely.
actually happen, but
Well,
Egypt is
we
working on it. Yeah.
we shall see. And of course, Egypt does have connections with Gaza, and we'll see what happens. I understand Qatar is also trying to do something.
Yeah. Jamila says, "Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for your great work. I have one question: why the West is losing confidence and they don't know what they are doing?"
Well, because the world has become bigger than the West. When I was born in 1961, I mean, the West, to a great extent, was the world. I mean, there were still colonial empires across Africa and other places. Um, Economic power was very, very concentrated in the West. The West had the overwhelming preponderance of military power. The Soviet Union, of course, existed, but it was perceived by most people at that time actually as a European country. It seems astonishing today because people no longer quite think of Russia in that way. But at that time, the Soviet Union was seen as a European power. And the Cold War, first and foremost, was a conflict in Europe. Now, today, the world is completely different. We have China as an economic superpower. We have the East Asia also growing in power as well. We have India with the world's fastest growing economy. And the United States is still a major power, it's still a great power, but Europe is losing its relevance. And that, of course, is affecting the overall confidence of the collective West as it used to be.
Sparky says, if Odessa doesn't end up as part of Russia, Russians will feel cheated.
A lot of Russians will feel cheated, as we pointed out in a program we did the other day. I mean, absolutely, it's not going to be an easy sell on Putin at all, even if he negotiates some deal on federalization and autonomy and all that. It'll be a very, very hard sell indeed.
Sammy295 says Stammer failure in UK and international, so trying to warmonger.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely right. Again, I said this in my program yesterday that Starmer is confronted with a whole massive number of problems in Britain to which he has no real idea how to respond to. So he is running away from those problems and is retreating into foreign policy, to which he now gives the greater part of his time. And when you're talking about foreign policy, it means policy of trying to seek some kind of confrontation with Russia. Playing Churchill, as Witkoff put it.
Yeah. Ralph Steiner says 2nd of April 2025 will henceforth be remembered as American Liberation Day, when 25 to 100% sanctions and tariffs were applied by the USA worldwide. Good idea.
Yeah.
Jungle Jin says, interesting. The Kennedy papers reveal the Hungarian Revolution as instigated by the CIA. Black ops also hit agricultural sectors in the Warsaw Pact.
This is absolutely true. And I should say again that the role of the United States in fomenting the uprising in Hungary in 1956 is quite well known. And the radio stations at that time, Radio Free Europe, played a big role. And that's all been known about for a long, long time too. But the Kennedy papers have provided a lot more perspective about it.
William says, if only Trump had signaled in advance he was changing U.S. policy on Ukraine, the EU and UK would not have been caught napping in a Biden time warp.
Why is that a bad thing? just asking. Would you rather that they prepared for it and ganged up with Biden to do something which would have been more difficult for Trump to reverse after he became president? I think Trump was absolutely right to give no full indication before he was elected of the extent of the diplomatic revolution he was planning.
Trump scares them, says Trump avoids some Russia moves to dodge collusion smears. The neocons can't be trusted. Vance Gabbard wing must rise. U.S.-Russia ties could restore EU sanity.
Well, I agree with this. I think that there is still an element of this. I think Trump was very, very badly burnt by what happened to him over the course of his first term. But I don't think it's the whole story. I think that Trump himself still has a tendency to try to, as he puts it, balance his team. So he brings in people like Vance and Hegseth, who are perhaps more classical, MAGA type people, and he tries to balance them with other people who are more close to what you might call the traditional establishment of the Republican Party, like Waltz and Kellogg. And I don't think that's ever worked for him well. And we perhaps see some of the problems.
Stinging Metal says Mark Carney, Joe Biden North, has been selected to implement the next WEF phase in Canada. It's hard to tell if Canadians will vote towards Polier.
Well, I agree.
Mike Clickalot says, how do the Russians observe the European leaders like Kaya Clueless keep beating the war drum? Thanks for the daily updates.
Well, I think with total contempt. I mean, the sense of mockery, but also loathing of these people, disgust and loathing of these people in Russia, not just within the government, but the wider population is well, it's there for everyone to see.
Game of Chairs says, could Zelensky be tempted to give up his presidency by opening his own chain of green t-shirt shops, perhaps with a 2-for-1 offer or 30% off combat shorts?
I think it's a brilliant idea. How many
Not a bad
problems
idea.
Not a bad
Ralph,
idea. No.
Ralph Steiner says Rachel Thieves Reeves from Accountants will throw a lot of disabled Brits on the scrap heap and lift taxes now to raise money for 100-year Ukraine pact.
Yes, which of course nobody is saying. Well, there's all sorts of explanations and reasons given as to why, this is all happening. The latest one, by the way, is that Reeves is supposedly boxed herself in because she's abiding by her fiscal rules. The reason we have fiscal rules is because Britain is head over heels in debt, and debt is growing. The levels of public debt in Britain are increasing, and we've made our situation far worse in Britain over the last couple of years. Firstly, we increased energy costs, which are amongst the highest in Europe. There's a big article in the Financial Times which says this, without mentioning that the reason energy costs have increased to the extent they have is because of the surge in gas prices, which was caused by the economic war that we supported. And also because we continue to give billions of pounds every year to Ukraine, around £3 billion a year at the moment. Some years apparently it's been up to £6 billion.
TQCX9 says, no, gifted Duran community memberships. Thank you for that, TQCX9. Jungle Jin says, the West outside the U.S., including Australia and New Zealand, still supports Ukraine. Aren't they all supposed to be vassals? If so, to whom are they vassals?
They're vassals to the Neocon Center, which was in Washington. They find themselves in the situation where the Neocon Center suddenly has become the anti-Neocon Center, and they are thrashing around trying to continue with policies which they become accustomed to, even as they see heresy coming from the place where they previously accepted the neocon truth. So they are in great confusion and deep panic, and they don't really know what else to do.
Little Falker, thank you for that awesome super chat. I heard a rumor Zelensky was involved in Trump's assassination attempt. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, maybe. But I mean, we've never seen a proper if anybody has seen a full explanation and account of the assassination attempt on Trump, please share it with me, because I haven't. As far as I know, the FBI investigation is still ongoing. We'll see whether Patel manages to get to the bottom of it.
Sparky says Putin may not want to hassle with Russia absorbing Western Ukraine, but in the long run, it may be a necessary evil. Otherwise, it will serve as a base for Western-sponsored guerrillas.
Who knows? Can I say my own view is that if everything goes perfectly well, if Zelensky or somebody replaces him, signs all the deals, if the Russians get the 4 regions, if there's demilitarization, if there's denuclearization, all of it still will not be the end of the situation, the conflict in Ukraine. It will simply be another chapter in a long story, the last chapter of which has not yet been written.
Fedor Snarksly says you two are great, like Churchill and Chamberlain.
Which one is which?
Churchill and Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain? Not Neville Chamberlain.
Not Neville, obviously. No.
Jungle Jid says Trump asked, "What's AUKUS? What would it take for the U.S. to leave Australia alone and forget about this disastrous contract?"
Well, that's a very good question. I don't think Trump has given it much attention, actually. I think he's been overly focused on Ukraine. He's giving less attention than he should until to the Middle East. And the result is the situation there is drifting out of control. And I don't think he's giving much attention to the Far East at all. And that's a problem.
Klaus Clemenson says, "I am a Dane, and I believe that the Danish Prime Minister's aggressive behavior towards Russia may have provoked the U.S. to talk about Greenland. It is simply impossible to keep her quiet." Kalis 3.0.
I agree. Totally. Thank you.
Ralph Steiner says, "Why people hate Americans for killing their kids?"
Well, I presume that's a rhetorical question.
Daniel Walker says, "Will there be a Trump-Putin summit?" Thank you.
Eventually, yes, but not as quickly as Trump perhaps hoped.
President-elect Pressure 609, thank you for the super sticker. Sparky says, "It would be nice if MBS would give President Trump the real scoop on what's happening in Gaza, etc., as long as he's hosting meetings between Russia and the U.S."
Yeah, it would be, yes. And what tells you that he's not?
Phantom of Many Topics says, continuing can accept C from Westerners because Southern Cantonese says that. Sky News and Fox News say G and G, which is a very, very word down below in the male body.
Well, we can do okay, right. I mean, I'm not going to get into this because I don't speak any Chinese. Just to say that anybody who knows anything about China and its language will know that there's many different ways across China of stressing Chinese. The language apparently that's spoken in Guangdong, there's a Chinese language, is as different from the language from standard Chinese, the language in Beijing, as apparently English is from Dutch. And apparently there are many different ways of pronouncing Chinese words, but I'm not going to pretend I'm any kind of expert in this topic. When I speak to Chinese, the Chinese people I know, they say "si," just to say.
Ruby's 200 said, is there going to be a civil war in Israel?
Well, there is a view that there is. Alistair Crook and Max Blumenthal have discussed this, and they say that the divisions in Israel are getting bigger all the time, and that one of the reasons we have all of these wars, according to them, is precisely because it's the only way of reconciling, or at least holding together, Israeli society. Well, I hope civil wars are avoided. I hate them. I think civil wars are a disaster. We had a civil war in Greece in the 1940s, and it was relatively brief. Nonetheless, it has overshadowed much of my life. So I think civil wars are an absolute disaster, and I hope Israel can find a way out, and that avoids it, and which leads to Israel achieving peace with its neighbors.
Commander Crossfire says, "Congratulations on 300,000, Alexander. Keep on rocking in the free world."
Thank you very much.
Ralph Steiner says, "Were 500,000 Iraqi children worth it for the USA?"
No. Well, again, I presume that is a rhetorical question. Obviously not. I mean, it was a terrible war, one which we both that we didn't know each other then. We both strongly opposed, and well, we see the results.
Lada Moreau says, "Hi Duran, how did you like Zelensky's interview to Time with a background of the burning Kremlin? I felt nauseated."
Well, so did I.
Typical Zelensky
Absolutely.
nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Commando Crossfire says Israel will push as far as it can with full U.S. backing. It will do its best to lower the Arab population in its immediate vicinity. Assad gone is a boon.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Israel is capitalizing on the fall of Assad, no question. I personally think that in the long term, it's creating more problems for itself. I mean, Assad was a very cautious leader. He avoided getting Syria involved in conflict with Israel to the extent that he could. But steadily now, Israel is encroaching on Syria, and sooner or later, there's going to be problems with this. And I mean, I hope that eventually, one day, an Israeli leadership emerges which understands this, that this is unsustainable policy that will end in disaster for Israel itself.
Otto says, I saw yesterday some statistic about Greek citizens having the highest support for Russians, though our government doesn't. One wonders if or how Hellas and Russia can one day be back as friendly states.
Very difficult to see, given that not just our government, but our entire political class and the class just below it, which I used to belong to, are owned by the Americans. Absolutely.
They hate Russia.
They hate Russia.
Political class and the class
Yeah.
under the politicians.
Yes.
The EU dissolving. I think that would be the one way that you can have a rapprochement between Greece and Russia. That's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sparky, how do Europeans abide having such obvious fools as their leaders? They would have lasted for a half second 40 years ago.
Well, I agree, but I mean, the one of the reasons is because the system in Europe is becoming more and more coercive. I mean, it was created by stealth. I mean, people were never told that the entire political structure of Europe was being reshaped in the way that it was. The structure that has been created, and it is imposing itself. It did so on Greece and Cyprus before, and on the other countries that are still called the pigs by some people. And we see now what's happening in Romania, and we'll probably start to see more of that in many other places too.
Commander Crossfire says, what do you make of Russia's change in the status of Ukraine refugees in Russia? What does this say about the view that Russia and Ukraine are the same people?
Well, again, I'm not quite certain what it means. I've heard some suggest that it's largely because refugees have now becoming fully integrated into Russian society, and there is an attempt to try and get them to move from refugee status to accept a full Russian citizenship. Just saying.
Daniel Walker says, in 30 years, U.S. and Russia are likely allies. Europe will federalize and distance from the U.S. and Russia. China relations will break down over Central Asia.
30 years is a very, very long time. I would not make those predictions myself. I don't think one can predict what the world will be like in 30 years. I don't think, my own view, for what it's worth, is that I don't think we're going to see that. I think that we will not see the US and Russia as allies against China, and I don't think we're going to see a breakdown of relations between China and Russia. But 30 years, a very long time ahead.
William says, Galloway on RT called Stammer Pound Land Churchill.
Yeah, which is a very, I mean, it's a much stronger criticism in British English than it probably is in other forms of English, just to say. Poundland is a shop in Britain where you buy everything for £1, just to say.
The Alkali says, for some deepish investigation of the Trump assassination, here's a start. And there's a link to a Rumble video. We'll definitely check that out.
Absolutely.
Matthew says, what does Europe do now over the next 10 years?
Dissent. I mean, we need to get through a deep crisis before we come out of it. I'm sorry to say, because the structures, the EU structures, and the political classes that are based around them are not going to go away, and they're going to retain control. It's not going to be changed through elections. We have to go right through the deep economic crisis which is coming in order to come through the other end. I'm sorry to say that, but that's my view.
Matthew says, could the security leak be to remove Waltz?
Yes, quite possibly.
Blair Swordston, thank you for that super sticker. Nico says, one last thing I forgot to mention and a problem for the future. Lukashenko, in his interview with Mario Naufal, pretty much said that this was his last term. What is going to happen to Belarus then?
An excellent question. There are rumors that Belarus and Russia are going to unite, and that this is now Lukashenko's objective over the next, I think it's 5 years that he's president. We'll see.
Sparky says Americans and Russians naturally get along well with one another. It takes massive, relentless propaganda to keep animosity between them.
This is absolutely true. I've heard this said many times, and I think it is true. I think Americans and Russians understand and get on with each other more easily and happily than, say, Russians and North Europeans do. Just saying.
Nico says, with Putin also having a 50-50 chance wanting a next term, he needs to find a successor fast, because there is also the future problem of Finland and Estonia choking St. Petersburg.
Well, I agree with that, but again, I don't want to move too far ahead. We have to get through the Ukrainian crisis, and Putin will still be there for at least until that has been brought to some kind of conclusion. And I think looking beyond Putin at the moment would probably not be something that, I think it would be distracting. Let me put it that way.
Farr says, thanks, American. I am disgusted in a genocide. Our economy is falling apart, going down the hill.
Yeah.
Latimer says, Larry Johnson called Pete Hegseth an idiot. I think I agree with Larry. Matthew says, how can the Duran become mainstream?
Do we want to be? I mean, that's the yeah.
Yeah, Jan Hajek, welcome to the Duran community. Monty105 says, I recently bought Guy Metten's book on the historical roots of Russophobia, and I encourage everyone to do it and read it. I was genuinely stunned how long the Russophobic snake oil has been up for sale.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Goes back at least as far as the 17th century in terms of European politics.
Finding Holmes says, thanks, gentlemen, for all your work. Thank you for that. Nico says, and because I like giving you things to laugh, recently I found that some Polish guy made a film about Putin using AI. It's dreadful. Don't watch it. Alexander, Alex, you watch it. It's a definite clown of the year material.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I'll look for it, Nikos. Definitely, that sounds interesting. The Blue Noble says, if I were Zelensky, I'd be going out for milk right now. True. Hawk 23 says 1 in 5 Aussies are on disability payments. We are spiraling.
Oh my goodness.
LJ Bazgal says, thanks for all the great work. Thank you for that. William says, big increase in fighter jets flying over North Wales from RAF Valley. I hope and now expect those pilots will stay in North Wales and see Christmas.
I hope so too. I should say that there was a strong article in the Daily Telegraph yesterday, which basically trashed the entire Ukrainian deployment idea. And it clearly, it identified itself as being sourced from people within the British military.
Bad Wolf FTX says, I think you are being too hard on Trump regarding the Middle East. Listening to DJT for years, he wants to end wars, but the one thing he wants to avoid at all costs is a nuclear war. A full war between Iran and Israel can easily end in nuclear. If there's even a 1% of this, then you do whoever to to avoid that possibility?
My own view about Trump is that he got so bogged down in Ukraine-related matters that he and Witkoff took their eye off the Middle East. I mean, Witkoff in his interview said that he was dealing with the Middle East, and then from one day to the next, he was asked to go to Moscow. And I mean, I'm not saying he's not a very capable man, but the Middle East requires a lot of attention at this time.
Sparky says, even though Pete Hegseth is a death cult Zionist, he's right to think about reverting to calling it Department of War instead of Department of Defense. Euphemisms can be misleading.
Very much so.
Mary Marr, thank you for that super sticker. Jungle Jin says, is Hezbollah neutralized? Why is it so passive?
No, I don't think it's neutralized, but it clearly took a lot of bad knocks in the previous months. After all, they lost their leadership, and presumably they're trying to rebuild it.
Nico says, and one last thing for you. I want to thank you both, my fellow Greeks, for tolerating me, for answering my questions in columns, and for educating me. You really have made a difference in my life.
Well, thank you, Nikos. And I mean, we always we enjoy your questions, if I can say.
Thank you, Nikos. Ralph Steiner says, if you're going through hell, keep going, Churchill. Churchill. Did you ever think you would be hearing so much about Churchill?
I was going to say, I mean,
Right.
this man has been dead for, how long now? By the way, just to say, I was in London when he was buried, and I remember his funeral. I was here when it happened. It was one of my earliest political memories, but I find it very difficult to understand why people are so fixated on him still.
Yeah. Thank you, Ralph, for that. Yeah, everyone is fixated with Churchill. At least in the West. In the West, they're fixated. In Europe, they're fixated with Churchill.
Yes.
Oh boy. Petros says, have not heard anything from Putin on the rights of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in ceasefire talks. Why?
He has talked about. I mean, the Russians bring it up all the time. To my knowledge, Putin has also done so. I mean, the question is what gets reported in the West. The West people don't like to talk about the Orthodox Church, but in Russia, it's a very, very big issue, and Lavrov certainly talks about it.
Rockabilly says the USA created the Ukraine war. Trump is the president of the USA. Why do the Duran think the USA Trump should walk away and not try to fix it? Not try to fix what it cost?
Because I think that first of all, I'm not convinced that the United States, the Trump administration, can fix it, at least not in any particular short period of time. The best way they can fix it is by ending aid to Ukraine and by focusing on their own problems. I mean, that's my own personal view.
Yeah. Goose says, what can be done to eliminate the stab in the back narrative? People in the West don't realize how bad the situation is for Ukraine, and this sets up future problems.
I agree. Absolutely. There will be problems with this. There will be problems with some people in Ukraine and some of their supporters as well. But, you deal with one problem at a time. And if you're going to end the war, then you have to accept that there will be some people who will say that you stabbed Ukraine in the back, even as it was on the brink of victory. It's not true, but, there it is.
Commander Crossfire says, will North Korea and Russian relations survive Trump?
Yes. I think this is definite and forever, actually. Mm-hmm.
Sparky says that Duran can become mainstream by selling out to Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire, like Tim Pool did. I don't recommend it.
Well, exactly.
I don't think he did.
I don't know.
Yes, I don't think so. But
anyway, we are not. We are not. I mean, we have no aspiration to become what is called mainstream. We're perfectly happy.
I don't think mainstream has any aspiration to approach us either.
No, exactly.
Brulaham, can you mention some Russian geopol failures from this past year? Curious to hear what you are both critical of. Considering
what is geopol?
Geopolitical, some Russian military geopolitical failures for this past year.
Well,
Curious to hear what you are both critical of, considering your general optimistic and positive outlook on their side of the ledger.
I mean, their major defeat was in Syria. I mean, Assad, whom they'd invested a huge amount of resources, fell. And I'm not sure what they could have done to reverse it. But again, one does sense that the Russians lost their focus on Syria after 2019. And things didn't go as they'd expected there. So, I mean, that clearly has been a failure. And it's one that the Russians don't seem to have a clear response to. I mean, do they keep their bases in Syria, as some people in Russia want, or do they leave? Which I think a lot of others would want to see.
I think there's a lot of anxiety. I'm not saying this is a failure, but I
Yeah.
think right now there's a lot of anxiety about the ceasefire and negotiating with Trump, Putin negotiating with
Yes.
Trump
Oh,
in the
yes.
U.S.
Oh,
because
yes.
there's that anxiety that
Yeah.
everyone is feeling, as if
Yes.
Putin might
Yes.
make a bad deal, another Minsk agreement or something like that.
Exactly.
I don't think he is. It doesn't look like
No.
he is, but you
No.
always have that anxiety. Is he going to
Absolutely.
to make another mistake with the West like he did with Merkel?
Exactly.
So I think that's
exactly.
pretty, yeah, it's
Yes.
pretty prominent.
That is absolutely. I mean, that is an ongoing thing. If we're talking about the last year, then I'd say Syria was their big
Syria, yeah.
their big fail. But certainly, if you're talking about the mood in Russia today, there is great uncertainty and nervousness about this process of negotiations with the Americans and about what Putin is going to do.
Scott Brugger, thank you for that super chat. Ralph Steiner says, is England undergoing a Black Viking invasion now?
A Black Viking invasion. Well, I don't know. What I think is that we have completely lost control of our own governance. I mean, we're not being governed effectively anymore.
From Zarael, Churchill is like racism. Don't talk about it.
Churchill is a figure of another time. He is he's the last important personality of the British Empire, which was what he was all about preserving. I mean, he belonged to the aristocratic class that created the British Empire and which personally benefited from it. That was his major drive. And it's not widely known, but at the end of his life, he considered himself a failure because all of that was dismantled. He was very depressed and very lonely and very sad and taking to drinking very heavily. And I know all about this because one of his bodyguards was a friend of my mother's. Just saying.
Klaus Clemensis says, my wife is Chinese, and the Chinese, like you, have a much more objective view of the world situation. Europe is very much alone with their Russophobia.
I agree.
Commando Crossfire says the loss of Syria was a loss to humanity. It goes to show what side of history Russia stands on, but Ukraine war must be Russia's biggest blunder in decades.
Well, do you mean the Ukraine war, or do you mean the decision to because I mean, if you're going all the way back to 2014, the Russians themselves have accepted, this has been a long discussion in Russia, that they made a big mistake in letting the events in Maidan play out as they did, that they'd taken their eye off the ball in Ukraine many years before, that the embassy in Kiev was not run properly, that they were parking failed politicians to Kiev. They were taking Ukraine for granted. And then, of course, after the Maidan crisis, they went for they cut all kinds of deals, firstly with Merkel and then with others, and that didn't work out for them either. Is that what you mean? Or do you mean the decision to start the special military operation? Because I don't think that was a blunder myself. I think that was something that the Russians were left with no choice but to do.
Alexander, I think that's everything.
Wow. Amazing live stream, if I may say.
Your final thoughts while I check on all the questions?
Well,
Got
we have to
everything?
wait. We have to wait and see what Lavrov is going to tell us today. That's going to be a big press conference, a big interview rather. But my own sense is that the negotiations, that the Russians are basically getting control over the negotiation process, and they're slowing it down. And I personally think that's a good thing, actually.
From Miss Texas G, I love the Duran updates between both Alex and Alexander, but how about once a week taking a question from the group, either YouTube or locals, and discuss it in a bit more depth?
That's a very good idea, actually.
You mean like one question, one topic?
One question and doing a dedicated program about it. It might be. It's a
That's a
thought.
good idea. It's an
Yeah.
excellent idea. Thank you, Miss
Yeah.
Texas G. That's something we could do on locals.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, Alexander, that is everything. Commander Crossfire says, I'm going back to 2014, is what he means. Loss of
Right.
sight.
Well, then I absolutely agree with you. I mean that, but the Russians have talked about this with each other many times. Putin has.
That was was it the Sochi Olympics?
There was
When
the
the coup
Sochi
happened, the
Olympics.
Maidan?
Putin was in Sochi, but
Yeah,
even before,
even
I mean, they
before.
were not paying the kind of attention to Ukraine that they needed to.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember they were sending all these terrible ambassadors to Kiev, Chernomyrdin, the former prime minister, Yeltsin's former prime minister, and then there was a man that I've forgotten his name, who was Zubarev or something like that, who was pro-Ukrainian. I mean, he was more pro-Ukraine than he was Russia. I mean, a liberal politician who'd been again parked there. I mean, the Russians completely lost sight of what was going on in Ukraine.
The U.S. has its neocon problem, which is a huge
Yes.
problem. But when you go back to Yeltsin and to Putin, Russia has had its problem with these types of people as well. It's taken Putin a good
Absolutely.
25 years to
Absolutely.
get on top of all of this.
Absolutely. No question. No question at all.
Ralph Steiner says, will British Spitfires be flying over Germany 8th of May?
Oh, I don't know.
Fernando Atoyo says, why the West does not talk about the Orthodox Church?
Because they don't like Orthodoxy. It's as simple as that. They never have done.
Yeah. Sparky says, great work. Keep on trucking. Thank you, Sparky. Black Tie, thank you for that super sticker. And Coyote Kid 60 says, sure appreciate your reporting and commentary. Thank you for that. All right. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you to everyone that joined us on Odyssey and on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, and the Duran.locals.com. And thank you to our moderators, Zariel and Peter and Valies. Thank you for moderating the chat. Alexander, have you recorded a video for today?
No, not yet. I've got to do that now.
Same here. Oh boy, and my mind's not working well today.
No.
Anyway. All right. Take care, everybody. And we'll
Absolutely.
have videos up very soon.
So,
take care.
thank you.